Good day, dear students. Today we are going to continue the previous lecture, technology gaming activities, but we are going to focus on two issues, role-play games and operational or business games. The first point I would like to present today, role-playing games. Role-play games most often have the character of simulation situations that are typical of the surrounding reality are played out in them, which are familiar to students from personal experience. For example, when visiting a movie, museums, and so on, or are observed by them in real life of adults, for example, doctor and patient. Sometimes role-play can be more theatrical, with conflict, climax, and denouement. By the element of conventionality is inherent in all types of role-playing game. The main feature of all role-plays are the existence of the problem underlying the game, the presence of certain characters, roles that have different relationship to the issue under discussion, the presence of a problematic situation that contains the conditions for cognitive conflict. There are 5 main structural components of an education role-playing game. The first one, goals, gaming and education. The second element is the content of the game, the language material of one or more conversational topics, a set of training situations. The third element is a set of roles through which the game is realized. The fourth one, the plot or the script of the game. And the last one, props. Role-playing foreign language lessons is used primarily for the development of speaking skills and correlates with both forms of speech, prepared and unprepared, creating the prerequisites for the natural transition of the first to the second. This, in turn, presupposes the preliminary assimilation of linguistic material, the formation of appropriate skills and abilities, which ultimately allow students to focus on the substantive side of the statement. Researchers have developed certain rules for role-playing games, namely, the student must be able to put himself or herself in a situation that may arrive in real life. The student must adapt to his or her role in the proposed situation, while in some cases he or she can play himself or herself, and in others, take on an imaginary role. Game participants should focus on the use of foreign language units for communication purposes or not on the other consolidation. The fact that education roles observe the capabilities of different types of speech activities provides a variety of functions that can perform in their learning processes. Now I would like to present the main functions of role-playing games. The first function. Role-play has great potential motivational simulating plan. In the process of the role-playing, the general motivating background is laid down in the script itself, and the specific situation and the role that the student received narrow it to a subjective motive and dictate the learner's speech, non-speech behavior. The second function, a role-playing game can be regarded as the most accurate model of communication, since it involves the imitation of reality in its most essential features. In a role-playing game, the concept of communication is revealed in its entirety as the speech and non-speech behavior of a person in the given circumstances. Role-playing performs the so-called programming function, that it expands the associative base in assimilation of language material. The fourth function is educational function. The game helps unite the learners' teams as the performance of roles involves the entire group of students who must interact in a coherent manner, accurately taking into account each other's reactions and help each other. The last one is upbringing function. The student also, in elementary form, gets acquainted with the technique of the theater, develops artistry, the ability to master gesture and speech. The very reincarnation helps to expand the psychological range understanding of other people. In the role-playing game, the communicative function of the language as a means of communication is realized to the maximum extent and moreover the very essence of the language. In this regard, we can talk about role-playing as an effective tool in the teaching and oral speech. From the point of view of students, role play is a game activity during which they play certain roles. The educational nature of the game is often not recognized by them. For the teacher, the goal of the game is the formation and development of speech and student skills. Role-playing game has great potential in terms of implementing the practical educational task facing the subject of foreign language. In a properly organized role-playing game, student behavior should be defined in situations. In this case, the selection of training situations should model the speech behavior of each and unite the whole group with a single activity of speech communication. Thus, a role-playing game is a speech game and education activity at the same time. The success of the role play is essential. That is why the methodologist identifies the stages of role playing and suggests an algorithm for developing a role play game in foreign language lesson. Galskov and Gies distinguish the following stage of role play game. The first, a preparatory stage, conducting the game, and the stage of control of the game. Now let's talk about the advantages of using role play in teaching a foreign language. Maximum activity of students. All students take part in the game, closely interacting with each other, which contribute to the creation of favorable climate in the interpersonal relations between students and the teacher, collective creative activity. Speech partners are determined in the game not only at the request of the teacher but also arbitrarily. Students have an opportunity to change roles, which allows them to use the language material in fuller extent, improve their skills and abilities in the communicative in the language. An atmosphere of interest and discipline reigns in the lesson, mental and physical activity, focus, and interest. Role-play game has great possibilities of motivational incentive plan and involves strengthening personal involvement in everything that happens. Role-play game helps to expand an associative base in the assimilation of language material, since the educational situation is built on the type of theatrical plays, which involves a description of the situation, the nature of characters, and the relation between them. Role-play fosters learning, collaboration, and partnerships. After all, its implementation presupposes the coverage of a group of students who must interact harmoniously, accurately, taking into account the reaction of their comrades, help each other. At the same time, a successful found gesture, mute action, if it corresponds to the situation, is encouraged by the whole group. As a result, students with a weaker preparation manage to overcome shyness, embarrassment, and over time fully engage in role playing. Also, there are some disadvantages of using role play. There are still no developed sets of exercise that would clearly define the purpose of the game, their quantity and quality. The use of role play games in the process of teaching a foreign language is non-targeted and unsystematic. The game is used mainly as an entertaining moment of the lesson. Despite of all the shortcomings, role-play game has great potential in practical educational relations. It helps to expand the scope of communication. This presupposes preliminary assimilation of language material and training exercise and the development of appropriate skill that will allow students to focus on the content of the statement. In this slide, I'm going to focus on operational games. In other words, we can say business games. Operational games involves several people interacting in simulation of a real-world problem for the purpose of aiding decision-making, planning, or policy implementation. Another term for operational games is business games. The business game is one of the most effective means of activation involving its participants in the game activity due to the content nature of the game situation itself, and capable for causing them a high emotional and physical stress. In a game, it's much easier to overcome difficulties, obstacles, as well as psychological barriers. The game, which is motivated by its nature, relates to cognitive activity and requires its participants to take initiative, perseverance, creativity, imagination. The business game is successfully used in teaching foreign language to students at higher education institutions, bachelor's and master's. It makes it possible to bring the learning process closer to the personal cognitive activity of students. The business games is a creation of a situation of choice and decision making in which the conditions are similar to real ones. It involves the following roles of participants that allow them to comprehend, experience, and master new features. The game contains a specific event or phenomenon that is subject to simulation, and it's allowed to assign the playing time to any period, for example, present, past, or future. Usually, a business game is a model of students' future professional activity. This is an imitation of a managerial research, pedagogical, real activity of the teacher, the head of a certain institution. The advantage of business game lies on the continuum both theory and practice, contributing to the formation of practical knowledge and practical skills. Games increase the interest in the subject being studied as they are accompanied by positive emotions. Business games are based on the principle of collective labor, practical utility, democracy, publicity, adversity, maximum process of those who participate in it, as well as unlimited perspective of creative activity within the business game. The business game is primarily a tool for a development of both theoretical and practical thinking of specialists. The ability to analyze complex production conditions to perform complex and new professional tasks. The pedagogical essence of the acting games consists in activated thinking, increasing the autonomy of the future specialist, raising the spirit, creativity in the education, approaching vocation and guidance, preparing for the future professional practice. In accordance with this, the purpose of business game is defined as a form of training organization, namely to form professional skills and abilities of students participating in active creative process. Methodical provision of the game implies the availability of the following materials: a prospectus and game perimeters, a set of real and game documentation. The degree of detailed methodological recommendations depends on complexity of the object of imitation, the characteristics of students' audience, the specifics of the discipline, its goals and objectives. Taking into account the content and features of teaching a foreign language, one can present the following classification of business games as follows: warm-up games such as brainstorm, club, connesions, themed entertaining games. Their task is to intensify the game and collectivist motivation, deepen the interest and imagination of the participants, focusing on non-standard approach to the material being studied. Situation role games include analysis of specific situation and their role play, constructive role, problem role, discussion games. The purpose of the application is formation of skills for the acceptance and effective performance of business roles, develop interaction, communication, productive cooperation, participation in the development of collective solutions. Creative games, it's a collective creativity in the creation of technical and artistic projects. Attraction of students to such games contribute to the development of creative potential, the teaching of initiative, courage, perseverance, and responsibility.